The blood-red sun sank beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched earth of the Rocking G Ranch as Sawyer Holcomb pulled her weathered wagon to a stop at the property's edge. Her arrival in Valentine, Nebraska in the summer of 1875 couldn't have come at a more desperate time. 3 years of drought had left the once prosperous cattle ranch barely clinging to life, much like the man who owned it. Sawyer wiped the dust from her brow and surveyed the desolate landscape. The journey from Boston had been long and arduous, but the letter from her late father's friend, Edwin Galloway, had been impossible to ignore. "My son needs help, though he's too stubborn to ask for it," Edwin had written before his passing. "The drought is killing everything, including his spirit." She hadn't expected such devastation. The earth had cracked open like wounded flesh, the grass long dead, and cattle bones bleached white in the unforgiving sun. How anyone survived here seemed miraculous. A gust of hot wind blew across her face as she gazed at the distant ranch house, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. "You're trespassing," a deep voice called out. Sawyer turned to find a man astride a dun-colored horse, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty and worn, but there was no mistaking the rifle resting casually across his lap. "I'm looking for Grant Galloway," she called back, straightening her spine. "I've come from Boston at the request of his father." The man stared at her for a long moment before nudging his horse forward. As he drew closer, Sawyer could see the hardness in his blue eyes and the lines of exhaustion etched into his sun-weathered face. He couldn't have been more than 30, but the land had aged him. "My father's been dead for 6 months," he said flatly. "Whatever he promised you, it's not mine to give." "He promised nothing," Sawyer replied, reaching into her satchel to retrieve Edwin's letter, "except perhaps the truth about what's happening here." Grant Galloway took the letter without dismounting, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. His jaw tightened visibly as he read. "Miss Holcomb, is it?" he finally said, folding the letter and tucking it into his vest pocket. "My father always did meddle where he shouldn't." His eyes swept over her city clothes and the wagon piled with trunks. "Whatever he told you about saving this ranch was a fantasy. We haven't seen real rain in 3 years. The creek's dried up. Half my cattle are dead and the rest will follow before winter." "Yet you're still here," Sawyer observed, a muscle in his jaw twitched. "This land is all I have left." "Then perhaps you could use some help after all," she said, pulling herself straighter. "Your father mentioned you needed a housekeeper who could manage accounts." Grant's laugh was harsh and without humor. "A housekeeper? Lady, look around. This isn't Boston with your fancy parlors and dinner parties. This is hell with the lid off." "I'm well aware of where I am, Mr. Galloway," Sawyer replied, her patience wearing thin. "And I didn't travel 2,000 miles to be turned away by a man too proud to accept help when it's offered." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Grant sighed, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "There's nothing for you here but heartbreak, Miss Holcomb," he said, his voice softened by something that might have been compassion. "But night's coming and Valentine's 10 miles back. You can stay until morning." Without waiting for her response, he turned his horse and began riding toward the ranch house, leaving Sawyer to follow with her wagon. She snapped the reins, urging her tired horses forward. As she approached the ranch house, Sawyer could see it had once been impressive, a large 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Now it stood weathered and neglected, paint peeling from the boards, 2 windows boarded over. A middle-aged Mexican man emerged from a barn as they approached. "Senor Grant," he called, "who is this you bring?" "This is Miss Holcomb," Grant replied, dismounting. "My father's final meddling. She'll be staying the night." The man nodded respectfully toward Sawyer. "Welcome, señorita." "I am Miguel Vasquez, foreman of what remains of the Rocking G." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Vasquez," Sawyer replied, grateful for the friendly face. "Help her with her things," Grant instructed Miguel before turning to Sawyer. "I'll show you to a room, just don't unpack too much." "You'll be leaving in the morning." The interior of the house surprised her. Despite the outward decay, inside was clean if sparse. A large main room contained a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, and a dining table with 4 chairs. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. "My mother's," Grant said, following her gaze to the books. "She brought civilization with her, or tried to." He led her upstairs to a small but tidy bedroom. "Washrooms down the hall, we eat at 6. With that, he closed the door, leaving her alone. Sawyer sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but the desolation of the land and the bitterness of its owner were more daunting than she'd imagined. Yet something about Grant Galloway's eyes, the pain behind the hardness, stirred her determination. This was a man fighting a losing battle alone, just as her father had described in his letters to Edwin. After washing away the dust of travel, Sawyer made her way downstairs to find Grant and Miguel seated at the table. An older woman was setting down a platter of beans and cornbread. "This is Alina, Miguel's wife," Grant said without looking up. "She keeps us from starving." "It is simple food," Alina apologized, "but filling." "It looks wonderful," Sawyer assured her, taking a seat across from Grant. "Thank you." They ate in awkward silence until Miguel mentioned the eastern fence line needed repair. Grant nodded, discussing cattle movements and water sources in clipped sentences. Sawyer listened intently, mentally cataloging the problems they named. "The well's running lower," Grant said, pushing away his empty plate. "We may have to dig deeper before fall." "If we had the men," Miguel replied. "Rodriguez and Jenkins left last week." Grant's face hardened. "We'll manage." "I could help with the accounts," Sawyer offered. "See where costs might be cut, efficiencies found." Grant fixed her with a cold stare. "There's nothing to account for, Miss Holcomb. We're not making money, just losing it slower some months than others." "Nevertheless, I'd like to look. I managed my father's shipping business for 5 years before his death." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "And what happened to that business after he died?" Sawyer's hands tightened in her lap. "My father's partner felt a woman had no place in commerce. He offered me a pittance for my share, which I refused, so he found ways to force me out." "And now you're here," Grant concluded, "running from failure." Sawyer felt her cheeks flush with anger. "I'm not running from anything, Mr. Galloway. I'm starting over on my terms." "Well, it won't be here," he stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." After he left, Alina patted Sawyer's hand. "Don't mind him, señorita. The drought has dried up his kindness along with the land. Was he always so?" Sawyer searched for the right word. "Hard?" Miguel suggested. "No, Grant was a good boy, became a good man. Fought for the Union, came back to help his father run this place. It was prosperous then." He looked toward the window where darkness had fallen. "The drought came 3 summers ago. First year wasn't so bad. Second year, the creek dried up. This year," he shook his head, "the bank wants payment. Cattle buyers offer nothing, and Grant, he takes it all on his shoulders." "His father thought I might help," Sawyer said quietly. "Don Edwin was a wise man," Alina replied. "He saw something in you through your father's letters, perhaps what his son needs most." Sawyer didn't sleep well that night, her mind filled with the problems of the ranch and the wounded blue eyes of its owner. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Grant already at the table, ledgers spread before him. "Good morning," she said. He glanced up briefly. "Alina's made breakfast. Help yourself before you head out." Sawyer poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "I've reconsidered leaving." Grant looked up sharply. "There's nothing for you here." "On the contrary," she replied calmly, "there's work to be done and I need work. It's thankless work that likely leads nowhere." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I have nowhere pressing to be and you clearly need help whether you'll admit it or not." Grant leaned back, studying her face. "You're stubborn." "A family trait," Sawyer replied with a small smile. "My terms are simple: room and board plus 10% of any increase in profits I help generate. If there are no profits, I still work. If after 3 months you truly believe I'm of no use, I'll leave without argument." "And why would you do this?" he asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "Your father helped mine once," she said simply. "Debts should be repaid. Beyond that, I need purpose, Mr. Galloway. My life in Boston is over. I'd rather build something new than dwell on what's lost." Grant stared at her for a long moment, then down at the mess of figures before him. 3 months, he finally said, but don't expect miracles. God himself seems to have forgotten this place. Sawyer extended her hand. Then we'll have to remind him. After a moment's hesitation, Grant took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but not crushing. Something electric passed between them, a recognition perhaps, of shared determination in the face of impossible odds. "I'll show you the ledgers after breakfast," he said, releasing her hand. Though I warn you, they make for grim reading. The ledgers were indeed dire. As Sawyer pored over them in the days that followed, she discovered the extent of the ranch's troubles. The drought had reduced the herd by more than half. Debt to the Valentine Bank was mounting. Most of the ranch hands had left, leaving only Miguel, Elena, and 2 young cowboys named Tom and Zeke. Grant worked from dawn until well past dusk, refusing to surrender to the inevitable. He mended fences, doctored sick cattle, dug deeper into the failing well. Sawyer began to understand the toll the struggle had taken not just financially, but on his very soul. By her second week, Sawyer had reorganized the accounts, drafted letters to creditors requesting extensions, and begun cataloging equipment that might be sold to raise cash. She'd also taken over the household management, allowing Elena to focus on the garden she stubbornly maintained with precious water hauled from the distant creek. On her 10th day at the Rocking G, Sawyer rode out with Grant to check the northern pasture. The land stretched desolate before them, the few remaining cattle looking pitifully thin against the barren landscape. "We used to run 500 head through here," Grant said, his voice distant. "The grass grew tall enough to hide a man on horseback." "It will again," Sawyer replied. Grant glanced at her, a hint of amusement breaking through his usual reserve. "Do you always believe in the impossible, Miss Holcomb?" "Sawyer, please," she corrected. "And yes, I find it more productive than accepting defeat." "Sawyer," he repeated, as if testing the name, unusual for a woman. "My father wanted a son," she explained. "He got me instead, taught me everything he would have taught a son. When my mother died, it was just the 2 of us." "My mother died when I was 12, Grant offered unexpectedly. "Influenza, the ranch was never the same after." "My father kept it running, but the heart went out of him." "Yet he wanted it saved," Sawyer observed. "Enough to send for me." Grant's face clouded again. "My father was a dreamer to the end." They rode in silence until reaching a dried-up water hole. Grant dismounted to check the cracked earth, shaking his head at what he found. "We'll have to drive the herd south to the creek tomorrow," he said. "It's a risk. The water's low there too, and they're weak, but they'll die here for certain." As they prepared to ride back, the wind picked up, sending dust spiraling around them. Sawyer squinted at the horizon. "Are those clouds?" Grant followed her gaze to the distant smudge of darkness. "Dust storm, more likely. We need to get back." They rode hard for the ranch, but the storm moved faster. Soon they were engulfed in swirling dust that stung Sawyer's eyes and coated her throat. She lost sight of Grant in the haze. "Grant," she called, panic rising as her horse skittered nervously beneath her. "Here." His voice came from somewhere to her left. "Follow my voice," Sawyer urged her mount forward, relief flooding her when Grant's form materialized through the dust. He grabbed her horse's bridle. "We won't make it back," he shouted over the wind. "Old line shack's just ahead, we'll wait it out there." The line shack proved to be a small, one-room structure that had seen better days, but its walls held against the howling wind. Grant secured their horses in the lean-to at the back before joining Sawyer inside. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident as he took in her dust-covered form. Sawyer nodded, coughing to clear her throat. "I've never seen anything like that." "Welcome to Nebraska," Grant said dryly, moving to a small cupboard where he found a canteen and 2 tin cups. He poured water for them both. "Drink slowly." Sawyer accepted the cup gratefully, noting how his fingers lingered near hers for a moment before withdrawing. In the confined space of the shack, she was acutely aware of him, the breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of him beneath the dust, the careful way he watched her. "How long will it last?" she asked, gesturing toward the storm rattling the shutters. "Hard to say. Could be an hour, could be all night." He settled onto a bench against the wall. "We're safe enough here." The storm showed no signs of abating as daylight faded. Grant lit a small lantern he found on a shelf, its glow casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. He also discovered a forgotten tin of beans, which he opened and heated over a tiny fire in the shack's small stove. They shared the meager meal in companionable silence, the howling wind outside making conversation difficult. Afterward, Grant spread his coat on the floor. "You should rest," he said. "Take the bench, I'll be fine down here." "That's ridiculous," Sawyer protested. "The bench is barely wide enough for one person. We'll both be uncomfortable." Grant's expression grew guarded. "It wouldn't be proper." "Nothing about my presence on your ranch is proper by Boston standards," Sawyer pointed out. "I think we're beyond such concerns." After a moment's hesitation, Grant nodded. They arranged themselves on the hard floor, backs against the wall, the lantern burning low between them. Outside, the storm continued its assault. "Tell me about Boston," Grant said unexpectedly. "It must seem like another world from here." Sawyer smiled in the dim light. "It is. Crowded, noisy, full of people rushing to be important." She glanced at him. "But beautiful too in its way, the harbor at sunrise, the public garden in spring. Do you miss it?" She considered the question. "I miss what I thought I had there. The security, the plans I'd made." Sawyer pulled her knees to her chest. "But those were illusions. After my father died, I discovered how quickly a woman alone becomes vulnerable." "What happened?" Grant's voice was gentle, lacking its usual edge. Sawyer hesitated, then told him about her father's business partner, James Whitfield, who had systematically undermined her position, turned investors against her, and finally presented her with an impossible choice: marry him or lose everything. "I chose to lose everything," she finished. "Sold what little was left to buy passage west. Your father's letter arrived just as I was deciding where to go." "That took courage," Grant said quietly. "Or foolishness," Sawyer replied with a small laugh. "The jury's still out." Grant's shoulder pressed against hers, warm and solid. "For what it's worth, I'm starting to think my father wasn't completely delusional sending for you." The admission hung in the air between them, significant in its simplicity. Sawyer turned to find his face closer than expected, his blue eyes reflecting the lantern's flame. "Why did you really stay?" he asked, his voice low. "The truth." "Because I recognized something in you," she answered honestly. "The same fight I've been waging, refusing to surrender when everyone says you should." For a moment, something raw and vulnerable crossed his features. Then the shutters rattled violently, breaking the spell. Grant cleared his throat and shifted away slightly. "We should try to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we'll come early." Sawyer nodded, though sleep seemed impossible with her heart racing and her skin tingling where his arm had touched hers. She closed her eyes anyway, listening to the storm's fury gradually diminish as the night wore on. She woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the shutters and the unfamiliar weight of something warm across her waist. Sometime during the night, they had slid down from their sitting positions. Grant's arm was draped protectively over her, his body curved around hers. His steady breathing told her he was still asleep. Sawyer remained perfectly still, torn between the impropriety of their position and the undeniable comfort it brought. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so safe. Grant stirred, his arm tightening briefly before awareness struck. He withdrew quickly, sitting up. "I apologize," he said stiffly, not meeting her eyes. "That was inappropriate." "It's fine," Sawyer assured him, sitting up as well. "We were sleeping, nothing more." An awkward silence fell as they gathered themselves and checked on the horses. The storm had passed, leaving the landscape transformed. A layer of dust covered everything, but the sky above was a brilliant, clear blue that seemed to mock the parched earth below. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill overlooking the property, Sawyer gasped. "Look," she pointed to the western horizon where dark clouds were building. "Are those rain clouds?" Grant studied the distant formation, hope and skepticism warring on his face. "Could be, or they could pass us by like every other promising cloud these past 3 years." But by mid-afternoon, the clouds had drawn closer, their underbellies dark and heavy. The air grew thick with anticipation, the wind shifting to bring the sweet smell of moisture. Every person on the ranch stopped work to watch the sky. "Do you think?" Sawyer began, standing beside Grant on the porch, Don't say it, he warned, though his eyes never left the approaching clouds. Don't tempt fate. The first drops hit the dust yard with audible plops, sending small puffs of dust into the air. Then more drops fell and more, until the heavens opened in a deluge that had them all shouting with joy. Miguel threw his hat in the air. Elena ran into the downpour, face upturned, arms spread wide. Grant stood frozen on the porch, watching in disbelief as water coursed down the roof and overflowed the gutters. Sawyer touched his arm. "It's really happening," she whispered. He turned to her, and the transformation in his face took her breath away. The hardness was gone, replaced by wonder and something that looked remarkably like joy. Without warning, he took her hand and pulled her into the rain. Water drenched them instantly, plastering their clothes to their bodies and washing away weeks of dust. Grant laughed, the first true laugh Sawyer had heard from him as he spun her in a circle. "You did this," he shouted over the drumming rain. "What?" "That's absurd," Sawyer laughed, wiping water from her eyes. "You arrive, and within 2 weeks the drought breaks?" He shook his head, sending water flying from his hair. "That's not coincidence. You brought the rain, Sawyer Holcomb." His use of her first name, combined with the wild joy in his eyes, made something shift inside her chest. Before she could respond, Grant pulled her close, one hand cupping her face. "Thank you," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "for believing when I couldn't." Then he was kissing her, there in the pouring rain, his lips warm against the cool water running down her face. Sawyer froze in surprise for only a moment before responding, her arms wrapping around his neck as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the rain continued to pour around them. Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he made no move to release her. "No," Sawyer agreed, her hands still linked behind his neck, "but I'm glad you did." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face and made him look years younger. "Me too." The rain fell steadily for 2 days, soaking deep into the thirsty earth. Streams that had been dry beds for years began to flow again. The ranch hands rode out daily to check on the cattle, reporting with amazement that green shoots were already appearing in places. The rain transformed more than just the land. Grant moved through the ranch with renewed energy and purpose. The weight that had seemed to press him down was lifting, and with it, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. Sawyer found herself watching him often, remembering the feel of his kiss, wondering if it had been merely a moment of euphoria or something more. Grant gave no indication either way, maintaining a polite distance in the days following the storm, though she occasionally caught him looking at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. A week after the rain, Valentine's banker, Harold Whitman, rode out to the ranch. Sawyer was in the office reviewing supply orders when she overheard his conversation with Grant in the yard. "Quite the miracle, this rain," Whitman was saying, his tone falsely jovial. "Changes things, doesn't it?" "It's a start," Grant replied cautiously. "Indeed. But I'm afraid it doesn't change our arrangement, Galloway. The note comes due next month, rain or no rain." Sawyer moved to the window, watching as Grant's posture stiffened. "The land's recovering, Whitman. Give me until spring, and I'll have enough cattle to sell to cover the debt and then some." The banker shook his head. "Can't do it. The bank has investors to consider. You've had extensions already." "What's this really about?" Grant demanded. "The rain changes everything, and you know it. Is someone pushing you to foreclose?" Whitman's expression hardened. "Careful with accusations, Galloway. The terms were clear. Payment by October 15th or the bank takes possession." After the banker left, Sawyer found Grant in the barn, angrily pitching hay into stalls with enough force to suggest he was imagining Whitman's face at the end of his fork. "How much do we owe?" she asked from the doorway. Grant didn't look up. This isn't your problem, Miss Holcomb." The formality stung after the intimacy they'd shared in the rain. "I thought we were past Miss Holcomb," she said quietly. He paused, leaning on the pitchfork. "Sawyer, then." "But my point stands. This debt isn't yours to worry about." "I disagree," she replied, moving closer. "I made a commitment to this ranch. That includes its problems." Grant sighed, running a hand through his hair. $5,000 plus interest, Sawyer's breath caught. It was an enormous sum. When is it due? October 15th, just over 5 weeks from now, and there's no way to get an extension. Grant's laugh was bitter. Whitman made that clear enough. Someone wants this land and they're using the bank to get it. Who, my guess, Stuart Wellington. Owns the big spread east of here. He's been trying to expand for years. Sawyer considered this. If that's true, maybe we can use it against him. Negotiate directly with Wellington, cut out the bank. Grant looked at her with something like admiration. That's thinking like a businessman. I told you my father taught me everything he would have taught a son, she reminded him. So he did. Grant's expression softened, and I'm beginning to be very grateful for that. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Sawyer felt heat rising to her cheeks. Grant took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it. I need to check the north pasture, he said abruptly. We'll discuss this more at dinner. As he strode past her, Sawyer caught his arm. Grant, about what happened in the rain, he stilled, not looking at her. I took advantage of a moment of high emotion. It won't happen again. What if I wanted to? The words were out before she could reconsider them. Grant turned slowly to face her, his expression guarded. You don't know what you're saying. This ranch could be gone in a month. I have nothing to offer you. I'm not asking for offerings, Sawyer replied steadily, just honesty. For a moment she thought he might kiss her again. Instead, he gently removed her hand from his arm. Honesty then, I can't think about that until I know the ranch is safe. I can't divide my focus. It wasn't quite a rejection, but it wasn't the response she'd hoped for either. Sawyer nodded, stepping back. Then let's save your ranch, Mr. Galloway. After that, we can revisit this conversation. The next weeks passed in a flurry of activity. The rain had indeed transformed the landscape, with green grass pushing through the mud and cattle beginning to recover their strength. But the miracle had come too late to solve their financial problems before the deadline. Sawyer threw herself into finding a solution. She wrote to contacts her father had in Chicago and St. Louis, inquiring about cattle buyers who might purchase futures on their recovering herd. She drafted a proposal for Wellington, suggesting a partnership rather than a sale, though Grant remained skeptical of that approach. Wellington doesn't want partners, he explained as they rode the boundaries one afternoon. He wants to own everything between the river and the mountains. The land was coming alive around them, the late September sun warm on their backs. In the distance, the herd grazed on fresh grass, their ribs no longer painfully visible. Then we need another buyer, Sawyer insisted. Someone with money who isn't aligned with Wellington. Grant's expression was troubled. Even if we found one, the timing's impossible. No one will pay full value for cattle that are still recovering, and we need full value to clear the debt. What about a loan from somewhere else? To pay off the bank? Who would lend to a ranch that's already failing? Grant shook his head. I've tried every angle, Sawyer. Sometimes you have to accept when you're beaten. Is that what your father would say? She challenged. Is that what the man I met in the rain would say? Grant reined his horse to a stop, staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Why do you care so much? This isn't your fight. Because Sawyer caught herself, because I believe in this place, in what it could be. In what it could be, Grant repeated softly. I used to see it so clearly, now I'm just trying not to lose what little remains. Then fight harder, she urged. We still have time. They rode in silence for a while, cresting a hill that overlooked the western portion of the ranch. Below them, the creek that had been dry for so long now flowed steadily, its banks greening with new growth. It really is beautiful, Sawyer murmured. Yes, Grant agreed, though when she glanced over, she found him looking not at the land but at her. He quickly averted his gaze. It always was. 3 days before the deadline, a letter arrived from St. Louis. Sawyer tore it open eagerly, then sagged with disappointment as she read. Bad news. Grant asked, entering the office where she sat. My father's friend can't help. His company is facing its own financial troubles. She set the letter aside, frustration evident in her movements. I'm running out of ideas. Grant leaned against the desk, arms crossed. You've done more than anyone could have expected, Sawyer, more than I had any right to ask. It's not enough, she said fiercely. We're so close. The land is recovering, the cattle are gaining strength. All we need is time. Time is the one thing Whitman won't give us. Grant's voice was resigned but gentle. Maybe it's time to consider what happens after. Sawyer looked up sharply. After what? After we lose the ranch, he said simply. Miguel and Alina have family in Texas. I've written to a friend in Wyoming who's offering work as a foreman. And what about me? Sawyer asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Grant's expression softened. You could go anywhere, do anything. You're the most capable person I've ever met, Sawyer Holcomb. What if I don't want to go anywhere? She challenged, rising to stand before him. What if I want to stay right here? The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Grant's eyes darkened as they searched her face. There may not be a here much longer, he reminded her softly. Then let there be in us instead, she whispered. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Grant closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers with an urgency that stole her breath. This was different from their kiss in the rain, not a celebration, but a claiming. His hands framed her face as if she were something precious, something he feared might vanish if he didn't hold tight enough. When they finally broke apart, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I've wanted to do that again since the rain, he confessed. Why didn't you? Sawyer asked, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. Because I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of starting something I couldn't finish, afraid of giving you reasons to stay when I might have nothing left to offer. I don't care about the ranch, Sawyer insisted. I care about you. Grant's smile was bittersweet. The ranch is part of me, Sawyer. I don't know who I am without it. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. But I'm starting to think I could find out if you were there to help me look. The tenderness in his voice made her heart swell painfully. Grant, a loud knock at the front door, interrupted whatever she might have said. They pulled apart reluctantly as Miguel's voice called out, Senor Grant, visitors. In the yard, 3 men on horseback waited. 2 were clearly ranch hands, but the third was older, expensively dressed, with a silver-handled cane across his saddle. Galloway, the older man greeted as Grant stepped onto the porch. Name's Jameson, Harrison Jameson. I own the J-Bar spread over in Colorado. Grant approached cautiously, Sawyer a step behind him. What brings you to Nebraska, Mr. Jameson? Cattle, the man replied bluntly. Heard you might have some to sell. His sharp eyes flicked to Sawyer, then back to Grant. And you are Miss Sawyer Holcomb, she replied. I help manage the ranch. Jameson's eyebrows rose, but he merely nodded. Unusual, but times are changing, I suppose, now about those cattle. They moved to the porch where Alina brought coffee. Jameson explained that he'd lost a significant portion of his herd to disease and needed healthy stock to rebuild before winter. Your timing is fortunate, Grant said cautiously. We have cattle available, but they're still recovering from the drought. Another month and they'd fetch a better price. Don't have another month, Jameson replied. Winter comes early in the mountains. I need to drive them back soon if they're going to make it. He sipped his coffee. I heard about your situation from a mutual acquaintance in Kansas City. Bank breathing down your neck, is it? Grant's expression remained neutral. We have some financial concerns, yes. How much does the bank want? Jameson asked directly. $5,000 plus interest, Sawyer answered when Grant hesitated. Jameson whistled. Steep, but not impossible. He set down his cup. Here's my offer. I'll pay $7,000 for 300 head delivered to my ranch by the end of October. Grant and Sawyer exchanged stunned glances. The price was far above market value, even for healthy cattle. Why would you pay so much? Grant asked suspiciously. Jameson's weathered face creased in a smile. Because I need those cattle, and because Stuart Wellington tried to swindle me 5 years ago, I don't mind paying extra to ensure he doesn't get what he wants. You know Wellington? Sawyer asked. Known him for 30 years, Jameson confirmed. Never met a more underhanded businessman. When I heard he was maneuvering to take your place, I decided it might be worth my while to interfere. Grant's expression remained guarded. And the delivery, our cattle aren't strong enough for a long drive yet. My men will help, Jameson replied. We'll take it slow, stick to good grazing land. He leaned forward. What do you say, Galloway? Do we have a deal? Grant looked at Sawyer, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. We have a deal, Grant said, extending his hand to Jameson. With one condition, I want half the payment up front before we leave. I need to settle with the bank immediately. Jameson's grip was firm as he shook Grant's hand. Done. I'll have the draft drawn up in Valentine tomorrow. We can start the drive the following day. After Jameson and his men left to secure lodging in town, Grant and Sawyer stood alone on the porch, watching the dust settle behind their horses. "Did that just happen?" Sawyer asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Grant's laugh was slightly dazed. "I think it did." He turned to her, his eyes bright with a hope she hadn't seen before. "We might actually save this place." "We will save it," Sawyer corrected, unable to stop her smile. "Your father was right to believe in miracles." Grant's expression sobered as he reached for her hands. "The miracle wasn't the rain, Sawyer. It was you." Before she could respond, he was kissing her again, right there on the porch for anyone to see. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When they finally separated, both breathless, his smile was radiant. "I hope you meant what you said before," he murmured against her hair. "About wanting to stay." "I meant it," Sawyer assured him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away now." The next 2 days were a flurry of activity. Jameson proved as good as his word, arriving with a bank draft for $3,500. Grant rode immediately to Valentine, returning with a receipt from Whitman and a barely suppressed grin. "You should have seen his face," he told Sawyer that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the newly green landscape in gold. "He was certain he had us beaten." And Wellington apparently stormed out of the bank when he heard the news. Grant's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. Jameson was right about him maneuvering to take the ranch. Whitman admitted as much once the debt was cleared. Sawyer leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "So what happens now?" "Now we drive 300 cattle to Colorado," Grant replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "And after that, we rebuild, make this place what it should be." Sawyer asked softly. Grant turned to face her, his expression serious. "That depends on you." "I know what I want, but I've been afraid to ask. You deserve more than a struggling rancher with nothing but hope and hard work to offer." "That's exactly what I want," Sawyer assured him. "Hope and hard work with you." The cattle drive to Jameson's ranch took 3 weeks. It was grueling work, made more challenging by the animals' weakened condition, but they lost only 5 head along the way. Jameson paid the balance as promised, and they returned to the Rocking G with enough money to see them through the winter and buy new breeding stock in the spring. The journey changed them both. Sawyer proved her worth not just as an accountant, but as a capable ranch hand, earning the respect of Jameson's cowboys and Grant's deepening admiration. For his part, Grant seemed to shed the last of his bitterness as they drove farther from the drought-stricken memories and toward a future bright with possibility. On their final night in Colorado, before beginning the journey home, Grant took Sawyer for a walk beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I've been thinking about what my father wrote," he said as they paused beside a creek that tumbled down from the mountains. "About why he sent for you." "And," Sawyer prompted when he fell silent, "he always could see what I needed before I knew it myself," Grant admitted, taking both her hands in his. "Sawyer Holcomb, when you arrived, I thought you were just another burden to bear. Instead, you brought life back to a dying land." His voice thickened with emotion. "You're my rain in the drought, my season of plenty after years of want." Sawyer's heart raced as Grant dropped to one knee before her. "I know it's soon," he continued, "but I also know what I feel. I love you. Will you marry me, build a life with me on the land we saved together?" Tears blurred Sawyer's vision as joy coursed through her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Grant stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her in a circle much as he had during that first rainfall. When he set her down, his kiss was a promise of all the years to come. They were married in Valentine 2 days after returning to Nebraska, a simple ceremony with Miguel and Alina as witnesses. Winter settled over the Rocking G, but inside the ranch house, warmth and hope flourished. As the first snow fell, Grant and Sawyer stood on the porch, his arms wrapped around her from behind, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Leaving Boston, coming to this wild place?" Sawyer turned in his arms to face him. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be, where we were meant to be." Grant's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. My season of plenty, he murmured before kissing her. Spring came early to the rocking G the following year. The land, revitalized by steady rains, exploded with life. New calves wobbled alongside their mothers in pastures thick with grass. Grant and Sawyer worked side by side, expanding the herd, repairing buildings neglected during the drought, planning for a future that stretched endlessly before them. By summer, the transformation was complete. Where once dust and despair had reigned, prosperity took root. They hired new hands, added a second well, and began construction on a larger barn. And in late August, as golden light bathed the thriving ranch, Sawyer shared news that made Grant's joy complete. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "You're sure?" Sawyer nodded, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Dr. Marshall confirmed it yesterday. By spring, we'll have a new Galloway at the rocking G." Grant gathered her close, his kiss reverent. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips, "for everything, for believing when I couldn't, for bringing rain to a drought-stricken ranch and love to a drought-stricken heart." Their son, Edwin Michael Galloway, was born the following April, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. As Sawyer rocked him on the porch while Grant mended tack nearby, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here from Boston society to Nebraska ranchland, from lonely independence to a love that sustained her through every challenge. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, noticing her contemplative smile. "About rain," she replied, "and how sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning." Grant set aside his work and joined them, one arm around Sawyer's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his sleeping son's cheek. "I never properly thanked your father," he said quietly, "for sending you to me." "I think he knew," Sawyer assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Somehow he knew we needed each other." As the sun set over the rocking G ranch, painting the prosperous land in shades of gold and amber, Grant Galloway held his family close and gave silent thanks for the woman who had brought rain to his drought-stricken ranch and become his season of plenty. 5 years later, the rocking G had grown into one of the most successful cattle operations in the region. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter, Sarah Elena, with her mother's quick mind, and another son, James, who toddled after his older brother with unwavering determination. On the 10th anniversary of Sawyer's arrival, Grant surprised her with a new house, built just where the old one stood but larger, with proper bedrooms for the children and a study where Sawyer could manage the ranch's increasingly complex finances. "It's perfect," she whispered as he showed her through the completed building, the children running ahead to explore their new rooms. "Not quite," Grant replied with a mysterious smile. He led her to what would be their bedroom and opened a door she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a small library, its shelves already filled with books from their old collection and many new ones besides. "Your own piece of Boston," he explained as Sawyer ran her fingers over the leather bindings in wonder. "A place for dreams in the midst of our practical world." That night, after the children were asleep in their new beds, Grant and Sawyer sat on the porch of their new home, looking out over the land they'd rebuilt together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if it hadn't rained that day?" Sawyer asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Grant's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes, but I like to think we would have found another way. You're too stubborn to let a little thing like a drought defeat you." Sawyer laughed softly. "We're well matched in stubbornness, I think." "In that and everything else," Grant agreed, turning to kiss her temple. "You know, my father used to say that the true measure of wealth isn't in what you own, but in what owns your heart." "Then you're the richest man in Nebraska," Sawyer told him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "In all the territories," Grant corrected with a smile. "My heart belongs to you, Sawyer Galloway. It has since you brought the rain." As they sat together, the soft night air carrying the scent of healthy grass and distant wildflowers, Sawyer reflected on the journey that had led her to this moment. From a desperate arrival on a dust-choked ranch to this abundant life, filled with love, it was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The drought had long since faded from memory, replaced by seasons of plenty that promised to continue for generations to come. And through it all, through every challenge and triumph, the love that had blossomed in that first life-giving rain continued to grow, nourishing them both like water to the parched earth. Grant Galloway had been right all those years ago. She had brought rain to the drought-stricken ranch, and he had become her season of plenty, a harvest of joy that would never end.